Hey, Reddit. I'm not really sure how to start this because my whole world has been flipped upside down. My name's Tom, and until recently, I thought my life was normal, even happy. I'm in my early 40s, married for 15 years to my wife, Laura. We have 2 kids, a comfortable home, and a life that, from the outside, probably seemed picture perfect. But here I am, typing this, feeling like my entire existence has been a lie. It started a couple of months ago. Laura began acting off. At first, it was small things. She started spending a lot more time on her phone, claiming she was just catching up with work emails or scrolling through social media. She'd come home later than usual, saying meetings were running long or she had errands to run. I didn't think much of it at first. Who hasn't had busy stretches at work? But something in the way she dismissed my questions started to feel wrong. Then, there was the distance. Laura had always been affectionate, even after years of marriage. We'd joke around, hold hands, and steal little moments to connect. But that started to fade. She'd brush off my attempts to talk, saying she was tired or stressed. Even when I tried to surprise her with a date night, something she usually loved, she barely looked up from her phone. At night, I'd lie awake, replaying our interactions, wondering if I was imagining things. Was I being paranoid? Insecure? But the gut feeling wouldn't go away. The breaking point came when I saw a name pop up on her phone. Eric. She quickly turned her phone away, brushing it off as a work contact. But it wasn't just the name, it was the way her whole body tensed, like she'd been caught. I couldn't shake the feeling that this Eric wasn't just a colleague. I knew I needed answers, but I didn't know how to get them without coming off as accusatory. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. I told myself it was to put my mind at ease, to prove to myself that I was just overthinking things. But deep down, I think I already knew. It only took a week for the PI to confirm my worst fears. Laura had been meeting Eric, not at coffee shops or restaurants, but at hotels. The investigator showed me photos, grainy but unmistakable, of her smiling, holding hands with him, entering a hotel room. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. The woman I'd built a life with, the mother of my children, was betraying me. I haven't confronted her yet. I'm trying to piece together what to do, how to protect myself and the kids. I feel angry, heartbroken, humiliated, and lost. I keep wondering how long this has been going on, what I missed, and what this means for our family. I don't know where to go from here. Part of me wants to scream at her, demand answers, and make her feel the pain she's caused. But another part of me feels like curling up into a ball and pretending this isn't real. I feel like my life is crumbling, and I don't know how to stop it. I guess I'm here because I need advice. What would you do if you were in my shoes? How do you confront someone you've loved for so long and trusted with everything? How do you even begin to pick up the pieces after something like this? The days after seeing those photos felt like I was living in a fog. Everything seemed surreal, like I was stuck in someone else's nightmare. I couldn't even look at Laura without hearing the PI's voice in my head, describing her meetings with Eric. She seemed oblivious to my turmoil. Or maybe she just didn't care. She still moved around the house like nothing had changed, chatting with the kids, making plans for the weekend. It made me sick. How could she just go about life so casually while tearing mine apart behind my back? I spent those days walking on eggshells, avoiding her as much as possible. I wasn't ready to confront her yet. I had too many questions and not enough answers. Instead, I tried to gather information. I checked her phone when she was in the shower, something I hated doing, but I needed to know. The texts were all deleted, of course. But her calendar had entries that didn't add up. Client meeting, team dinner, yoga class. I knew now that those weren't work-related at all. It was our son, Ethan, who unknowingly dropped the next bombshell. Over dinner one night, he casually mentioned how Uncle Eric had visited a couple of times while I was at work. Uncle Eric? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Yeah, Ethan said, shoving a forkful of spaghetti into his mouth. Mom said he's her friend from work. He's cool. He brought me Pokemon cards. Laura froze. I could see her hand trembling slightly as she reached for her glass of wine. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Oh, he just stopped by to drop something off for a project, she said quickly. I didn't push it. Not then. But inside, I was boiling. She was lying to my face, and worse, she was bringing this man into our home, around our children. The thought made me feel like a failure, not just as a husband, but as a father. I wanted to grab her and yell, "How could you do this to us?" But Ethan and our daughter Sophie were right there, laughing and joking like everything was normal. I couldn't ruin their dinner with this mess. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat on the couch with my laptop and started digging. I searched Eric's name and found his LinkedIn profile. He worked at Laura's company, alright, same department, even. I stared at his smug profile picture, his perfect teeth, and stupid corporate headshot pose. Was this guy really worth blowing up our family? Then I found his Facebook. His profile wasn't private, and scrolling through his photos felt like taking a knife to the chest. There he was, grinning at company parties, Laura standing beside him in more than a few pictures. One photo caught my eye, a group shot taken at a happy hour. Laura was laughing, holding a glass of wine. Eric's hand rested on her lower back, way too familiar for my comfort. The caption read, "Team Bonding Night." I felt a lump rise in my throat. This wasn't just some fling. They looked comfortable together, like they'd been doing this for a while. I closed the laptop and buried my face in my hands. What was I supposed to do now? Part of me wanted to confront Eric instead of Laura, make him face me, man to man. But what good would that do? He didn't owe me anything. She did. The next morning, I woke up with a plan, or at least, the start of one. I needed to talk to someone who could guide me through this. I called my older brother, Jack. We weren't super close, but he'd always been the level-headed one in the family, the guy who could see things clearly when emotions clouded the picture. "Tom," he answered groggily, clearly not expecting a call at 7 a.m. on a Saturday. "What's up? Everything okay?" "No," I said, my voice breaking. "Jack, I think Laura's cheating on me." There was silence on the other end. Then finally, "What makes you say that?" I told him everything, the phone, the investigator, the photos, Ethan's comment. Jack didn't interrupt once. When I finished, I could hear him exhale deeply. "Man," he said, "that's heavy. Have you talked to her about it yet?" "Not yet," I admitted. "I don't know how." "Listen," Jack said, his voice firm. "You need to stay calm, no matter what. Don't let her twist this on you. Don't let her gaslight you. And don't blow up in front of the kids. You have to think about them first." "I know," I said, my chest tightening. I don't know how to start the conversation." "Start with the truth," Jack said. "Tell her what you know and see what she says. You might not get the answers you want, but at least you'll know where you stand." As I hung up, I felt a small sense of relief. At least I wasn't carrying this burden alone anymore. But Jack's advice didn't make the prospect of confronting Laura any less terrifying. I still didn't know what I was going to say or how I'd react to her lies, or worse, the truth. That afternoon, as I watched Laura laughing with the kids, I realized I couldn't wait much longer. The cracks in our life were already showing, and if I didn't address this soon, they'd swallow us whole. Tomorrow, I decided. Tomorrow, I'd finally confront her. The next day felt like the calm before a storm. I woke up early, the weight of what I had to do pressing down on me like a boulder. Laura was in the kitchen, humming as she made breakfast. The sight of her, so familiar, so ordinary, only made the task harder. How could she betray me and still act so normal? The kids were upstairs, playing a video game. I knew I had to talk to her before they came down, so I took a deep breath, walked into the kitchen, and sat at the table. "Laura," I started, my voice already trembling. "We need to talk." She glanced at me, her expression unreadable. "What's wrong?" she asked, pouring herself a cup of coffee. I stared at her for a moment, trying to find the words. "I know about Eric," I finally said, my voice low but steady. For a split second, I saw something flash in her eyes, shock, maybe, or guilt. But she recovered quickly, setting the coffee pot down with an unnerving calmness. "What do you mean, you know about Eric?" she asked, her tone defensive. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the photos the PI had given me. I slid them across the table. "I know you've been seeing him. I know you've been meeting him at hotels. And I know you've lied to me about where you've been." Her face went pale as she looked at the photos, her hand hovering over them but not touching them. "You hired someone to spy on me?" she asked, her voice a mix of anger and disbelief. "Don't turn this on me, Laura," I snapped, my anger bubbling to the surface. "This isn't about what I did. This is about what you've been doing behind my back." She finally sat down, her hands clasped tightly together. "It's not what you think," she said softly. "Then explain it to me," I said, leaning forward. "Explain how these pictures aren't what they look like. Explain how you've been bringing him into our house, around our kids. Make it make sense, Laura." Her eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't about to let her guilt trip me. She opened her mouth to speak, but then hesitated. I could see her weighing her options, trying to decide how much of the truth to tell. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she finally said, her voice trembling. "It started as just harmless flirting. He's my coworker, Tom. We work closely together. It wasn't serious at first." "At first?" I repeated, my voice rising. "So you admit it's serious now?" She looked away, tears streaming down her face. "It just got out of hand. I didn't mean for it to go this far." "You didn't mean for it to go this far?" I repeated, incredulous. "Do you even hear yourself? You've been sleeping with him, lying to me, lying to our kids, and you want me to believe it just happened?" She buried her face in her hands, sobbing. I wanted to feel sorry for her, but all I could feel was rage. "How long, Laura?" I demanded. "How long has this been going on?" She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "A few months," she admitted. "I'm so sorry, Tom. I didn't know how to stop. I was scared of losing everything." "Losing everything?" I repeated, laughing bitterly. "You already have. Do you even care about what this is doing to me? To the kids?" "I do care," she said quickly. "I love you, Tom. I love our family. I made a mistake, a terrible, stupid mistake. But we can fix this. We can go to counseling, work through this." I shook my head, disgusted. "You don't get to decide that, Laura. You don't get to destroy our marriage and then tell me how we're going to fix it." The sound of footsteps on the stairs made us both freeze. The kids were coming down. I took a deep breath and stood up, shoving the photos back into my pocket. "This isn't over," I said quietly, my voice like ice. "But for their sake, we're not doing this in front of them." Laura nodded, wiping her tears and forcing a shaky smile as the kids entered the kitchen, chattering about their game. I plastered on a smile too, but inside, I felt like I was falling apart. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I could barely focus on anything, my mind replaying our conversation over and over. She admitted it. She admitted everything. And yet, a part of me still felt like I didn't have the whole story. There were still too many unanswered questions, too many gaps in her excuses. That night, after the kids were in bed, I confronted her again. This time, I wasn't interested in hearing her apologies or excuses. I wanted the truth, all of it. And what she told me next shattered me even further. The kids were finally asleep, and the house was eerily quiet. Laura and I sat across from each other in the living room, the dim light from the lamp casting long shadows on her face. She looked exhausted, but I didn't care. I needed answers. "Start talking," I said, my voice low but firm. She hesitated, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. "I already told you the truth, Tom," she began, but I cut her off. "No," I snapped. "You told me a version of the truth. I want all of it. No half-truths, no sugarcoating. Just tell me everything." She looked down, her lip trembling. "It wasn't just a few months," she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I froze. "How long, Laura?" "A year," she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. "It started about a year ago." My stomach churned. A year. For 12 months, she'd been sneaking around, lying to my face, building this secret life while I thought everything was fine. I leaned back in my chair, struggling to process her words. "How did it start?" I asked. She hesitated again, but under my glare, she finally spoke. "It was after that fight we had about me working late all the time," she said. "Eric was there, and he listened. He understood how stressed I was, how unappreciated I felt." I clenched my fists, anger surging through me. "So what? You had a bad day, and he became your personal therapist?" She flinched but nodded. "At first, yes. He was just a friend, someone to vent to. But then, one night, we stayed late to finish a project. We had drinks after. One thing led to another and I—" "Don't say it," I interrupted, my voice shaking. "I don't need to hear the details." The room fell silent. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, a mix of rage and heartbreak threatening to boil over. And you kept it going, I said bitterly. Even after you knew it was wrong, you kept seeing him. She nodded, her tears falling freely now. I didn't mean to hurt you, Tom. I swear, I didn't. I felt like I couldn't stop. It was like I was living two lives. Two lives, I repeated, laughing bitterly. Well, congratulations, Laura. You were an excellent actress. I had no idea my wife was capable of such betrayal. I love you, she said desperately, reaching for my hand. I never stopped loving you. I pulled away, disgusted. You don't get to say that to me, I said, my voice breaking. You don't get to love someone and do this to them. That's not love, Laura. She started sobbing, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. I felt like I was suffocating, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me from all sides. You brought him into our home, I said after a moment, my voice cold. You let him meet our kids. Do you even realize how disgusting that is? I didn't mean for that to happen, she said through her tears. He only came by a couple of times, I swear. It wasn't like that. Like what? I shot back. Like you were grooming him to replace me? Or were you just testing the waters to see how well he fit into the family? She shook her head frantically. No. It wasn't like that at all. He never meant anything to me, Tom. It was a mistake. A mistake. I said, laughing bitterly. A mistake is something you do once. This was a year-long affair, Laura. You don't trip and fall into a hotel room with someone over and over again. Her sobs grew louder, but I felt nothing. No pity, no compassion. Just emptiness. I trusted you, I said, my voice cracking. I trusted you with everything. And you threw it all away. For what? Some cheap thrill? Some ego boost? She didn't answer, and for the first time, I realized she didn't have an answer. There was no justification, no explanation that could ever make this okay. I don't even know who you are anymore, I said, standing up. You've been lying to me for so long, I don't think I'll ever trust another word that comes out of your mouth. Please, Tom, she begged, reaching for me. Don't give up on us. We can fix this. We can go to therapy, work through this. I'll do whatever it takes. I shook my head, looking down at her. I don't think there's anything left to fix, Laura, I said quietly. You didn't just betray me. You betrayed our family. You betrayed the life we built together. And I don't think I can ever forgive you for that. I walked out of the room, leaving her sobbing on the couch. Upstairs, I checked on the kids, who were fast asleep, blissfully unaware of the chaos unfolding downstairs. As I stood in the doorway, watching them, one thought kept running through my mind. How do I protect them from this? From her? I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let this go. Not for my sake, and definitely not for theirs. The next morning, the house felt like a tomb. Laura stayed in our bedroom, probably too ashamed to face me. I avoided her, spending most of my time with the kids. Their laughter was the only thing keeping me from spiraling. That evening, I asked her to talk again. She came downstairs, looking like she hadn't slept. Have you told him it's over? I asked bluntly. She nodded. I sent a message yesterday. I told him we couldn't see each other anymore. I didn't trust her answer. Show me. Her hesitation was all I needed to see. I deleted the conversation, she said softly, her eyes darting away. I laughed bitterly. Of course you did. Why wouldn't you cover your tracks again? Tom, I'm serious. I told him it's over, she insisted. But you kept him a secret for a year. Why should I believe anything you say now? She started crying, but I felt no sympathy. You destroyed us, Laura, I said, my voice cold. And I'm not sure there's a way back. Her sobs grew louder as I left the room. Upstairs, I started making plans. I didn't know what the future would look like, but I knew one thing. I couldn't let her lies keep dragging me down. The next few days were quiet, almost eerie. Laura was doing everything she could to appear normal in front of the kids, smiling, helping with homework, cooking their favorite meals. But every time we crossed paths, I could feel her watching me, waiting for me to say something. I didn't. I needed time to think, to figure out what came next. I started making calls during my lunch breaks at work, reaching out to lawyers. I didn't know much about divorce, but I knew I needed to be prepared. The first lawyer I spoke to was straightforward: document everything, avoid unnecessary conflict in front of the kids, and protect my financial interests. At home, I began gathering records, bank statements, emails, anything that might be relevant. I hated how clinical it felt, like I was dismantling my own life piece by piece. One night, after the kids were asleep, Laura cornered me in the kitchen. "Tom, please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You can't shut me out like this. We need to talk." I set down the plate I was washing and turned to face her. "What's left to say, Laura? You made your choices, and now I have to make mine." Her eyes filled with tears. "You're not even giving us a chance." "A chance?" I said, laughing bitterly. "You had plenty of chances, Laura. A whole year of them. You chose him every single time." She reached for me, but I stepped back. "The only thing I care about now is the kids," I said firmly. "And making sure they're okay. That's it." Her face crumpled, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. I walked past her, heading to the couch where I'd been sleeping for the past week. As I lay there in the dark, I realized something. I wasn't just planning for my future. I was planning for theirs. Whatever happened next, I had to make sure the kids came first. Week later, I sat in the lawyer's office. The room felt cold and sterile, but the attorney's calm demeanor helped me stay grounded. "Do you want to file for divorce immediately, or are you looking for a separation first?" he asked. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to slam the door on this marriage and never look back. But the kids, they complicated everything. "I want to protect the kids," I said finally. "Whatever that looks like." He nodded. "Then let's focus on custody arrangements first. It'll give you time to decide what's next. In the meantime, document everything. Keep communication with your wife polite but limited. And stay consistent with the kids. They need stability." When I got home, Laura was waiting for me, sitting at the kitchen table. She looked up as I walked in. "Where were you?" she asked. "Work," I replied curtly, walking past her. "Tom, please," she began, but I cut her off. "Not now, Laura," I said, my voice firm. She looked like she wanted to argue but didn't. Instead, she slumped back into her chair, defeated. Upstairs, I sat with Ethan and Sophie, helping them with their homework. Their laughter as we joked about math problems made my chest tighten. For their sake, I had to stay strong. As I tucked them into bed that night, Ethan grabbed my hand. "Dad, are you and Mom okay?" The question caught me off guard. "Why do you ask that, buddy?" He shrugged. "You just seem different." I forced a smile. "We're okay. Don't worry about it. I'll always be here for you and your sister, no matter what." He nodded, but the worry in his eyes lingered. As I closed the door to their room, I felt a lump rise in my throat. I couldn't let my anger at Laura cloud my role as their father. Whatever came next, they had to be my priority. The next evening, Laura dropped a bombshell. She waited until the kids were upstairs, then approached me in the living room, clutching her phone like a lifeline. "I told Eric it's over," she blurted out, her voice shaky. I barely looked up. "You already said that." "No, this time it's different," she insisted, sitting down across from me. "He didn't take it well. He threatened to tell you everything himself if I didn't leave you." Her words hit me like a brick. "What else is there to tell, Laura?" I asked coldly. "Because I think I've heard enough lies for a lifetime." She hesitated, then lowered her gaze. "He says he's in love with me," she admitted softly. "And if I don't go to him, he'll come to you." I laughed bitterly. Let him. At least then I might finally get the full story. "Tom, I'm serious," she snapped, her voice rising. "I don't want him to ruin what's left of us." "What's left of us?" I repeated, standing up. "Do you even hear yourself? You already ruined us, Laura. You brought this into our home. You let it fester for a year. And now you're worried about what he might say." She started crying, but I couldn't bring myself to care. "You made your choice, Laura. You don't get to play the victim now." I left her sitting there, sobbing into her hands. Upstairs, I paced the bedroom, my mind racing. Eric's threat didn't scare me. I had no more illusions left to shatter. But it solidified something for me. This wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. I had to protect the kids too, from her, from him, from this entire mess. I grabbed my phone and texted my lawyer. Things just got worse. We need to move forward. Let's talk tomorrow." I didn't sleep that night. But for the first time, I felt like I was finally taking control. The next morning, I was barely out the door when Laura grabbed my arm. "Tom, please, just listen to me," she begged. I shook her off. "I'm done listening, Laura." Her eyes filled with desperation. "He might show up at the house. I don't know what he's capable of." Her words stopped me in my tracks. "You're telling me this now?" She nodded, her hands trembling. "He's been calling non-stop since I ended things. I blocked him, but I'm scared he'll do something." I stared at her, torn between anger and disbelief. "This is what you brought into our lives, Laura," I said, my voice cold. "And now I have to clean up your mess." Without waiting for a response, I walked out and headed straight to my lawyer's office. He listened as I recounted what Laura had told me, taking notes. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "This changes things. If Eric is making threats, we need to protect you and the kids. What do I do?" I asked, my voice tight. "Start by documenting everything," he said. "Texts, calls, anything Laura can provide. If he does show up or tries to contact you, don't engage. Call the police immediately. And we'll expedite filing for separation. The sooner you create boundaries, the better." I left the office feeling both prepared and furious. This man, this stranger, had invaded my life, my home, and now he was threatening me and my family. That night, I confronted Laura again. "If he contacts you one more time, you tell me immediately," I said. She nodded quickly, her face pale. "I will, I promise." For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes, not for herself, but for what might happen to us. As I lay awake that night, listening for any sounds outside the house, I realized something chilling. This wasn't just about a broken marriage anymore. It was about survival. 2 days later, the inevitable happened. I was working from home when the doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw him, Eric, standing on my porch like he belonged there. My blood boiled. I stepped outside, closing the door firmly behind me. "What are you doing here?" I said through gritted teeth. He smirked, his confidence unnerving. "We need to talk, Tom. Man to man." "There's nothing to talk about," I shot back. "You're trespassing. Leave." "I just want to clear the air," he said, his tone smug. "Laura and I, what we had, it wasn't about you. It was real." His words hit like a punch to the gut. "You had no right," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "She came to me, Tom," he continued, shrugging. "You can't hold that against me." I stepped closer, my fists clenched. "You don't get to stand here and play the victim. You're a coward. You snuck around with another man's wife, and now you think you're entitled to some explanation." Eric's smirk faltered. "She's not happy with you," he said, his voice rising. "You're holding her back." Before I could respond, the door behind me opened. Laura stood there, her face pale. "Eric, you need to leave," she said firmly. "Laura," he said, his tone softening, "we can still fix this. You don't have to stay here." "I said leave," she repeated, her voice shaking. He stared at her for a moment, then turned back to me. "This isn't over," he muttered before walking away. I watched him until he was out of sight, my anger simmering just below the surface. Turning to Laura, I said, "If he ever comes back, I'm calling the police. Do you understand me?" She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. But her apology felt hollow. Eric's visit had made one thing clear: this wasn't just her mess anymore. It was mine too, and I had to take control before it spiraled further. After Eric's visit, I knew I couldn't wait any longer to act. That night, I sat Laura down in the living room. "This is what's going to happen," I said firmly, my tone leaving no room for argument. "I'm filing for legal separation. We'll work out custody arrangements for the kids, but until this situation with Eric is under control, I'm not leaving them alone with you." Her face crumpled. "Tom, please. I don't want to lose the kids." "Then prove you're serious about fixing this," I said, crossing my arms. "Show me you're cutting ties with him for good. Block his number, delete every contact, and stop making excuses." "I already blocked him," she protested. "Then why did he think he could come here?" I shot back. "You've given him too much access. That ends now." Laura nodded weakly, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Okay. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't take the kids from me." I didn't answer. My trust in her was shattered, and words alone weren't enough to fix that. The next day, I met with my lawyer again. He filed the separation paperwork and suggested a restraining order against Eric. It wasn't something I wanted to drag the kids into, but if it meant keeping them safe, I was willing to do it. Meanwhile, I started taking small steps to prepare for a new reality. I looked into counseling for the kids, knowing they'd need someone to help them process the changes coming their way. I also began searching for a place of my own, somewhere I could create a stable environment for Ethan and Sophie when the time came. Laura tried to make amends in the days that followed. She doted on the kids, stayed off her phone, and avoided mentioning Eric. But it felt performative, like she was doing it out of fear rather than genuine remorse. I didn't trust her, and I didn't trust that Eric would stay away. Every sound outside the house made me tense. Every unexpected knock on the door sent my heart racing. This wasn't the life I wanted for me or my children. But until I could fully separate myself from Laura and the chaos she brought into our lives, I had no choice but to endure it. Over the next week, things grew tense and suffocating in the house. Laura tried to pretend everything was normal, making breakfast, asking about my day, sitting with the kids during movie night, but I couldn't reciprocate. Every interaction felt forced, as though we were both silently counting down the days until it all fell apart. I threw myself into work and parenting, pouring every ounce of energy into keeping things as stable as possible for Ethan and Sophie. But they weren't blind. Ethan, in particular, picked up on the distance between Laura and me. "Why aren't you and Mom talking?" he asked one evening after dinner, his voice quiet but probing. I paused, unsure how to answer. "Sometimes adults go through hard times," I said carefully. "But it doesn't change how much we love you and your sister." He nodded slowly, but his furrowed brow told me he wasn't satisfied with the answer. Meanwhile, Laura continued to insist that she had cut all ties with Eric. She showed me her blocked contacts list, deleted emails, and even offered to hand over her phone for me to check. But no matter what she did, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she was holding something back. The feeling was confirmed when I got a call from my lawyer. "Tom, I just received a notice from Eric's attorney," he said. "He's claiming that Laura initiated the affair and that you're using the situation to alienate her from the children." I gripped the phone tightly, my knuckles turning white. "He's lying," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "I figured as much," my lawyer replied. "But this complicates things. If Eric decides to escalate, it could turn into a full-blown legal battle. You'll need to stay vigilant. Keep documenting everything." After hanging up, I sat in silence, staring at the floor. It was one thing to deal with Laura's betrayal, but now Eric was inserting himself even further into my life, trying to weaponize my pain against me. That night, I confronted Laura. Eric's lawyer contacted mine, I said bluntly as soon as the kids were asleep. Her face went pale. "What? Why?" "He's claiming you initiated everything and that I'm using this to keep the kids from you," I said. "So tell me, Laura, did you give him any reason to think that? Are you still talking to him?" Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I thought she might deny it. But then her shoulders slumped, and she looked away. "He called from a different number a few days ago," she admitted quietly. "He begged me to meet him, just to talk. I told him no." My heart sank. "You should have told me," I said, my voice hard. "I didn't want to upset you," she said, tears forming in her eyes. "I didn't know he'd take things this far." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You don't get to decide what I need to know, Laura. You brought this man into our lives. You lied to me, to the kids, for over a year. And now he's trying to ruin what's left of my life, and you're still keeping secrets." "I swear, I haven't seen him or talked to him since then," she said, her voice trembling. "But you didn't block his number fast enough, did you?" I snapped. "You let him think he still had a chance, and now he's dragging us into his mess." Her tears spilled over, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about my family, my future, and the trust she had shattered beyond repair. That night, I slept on the couch again, my mind racing with questions. What else was she hiding? And how far was Eric willing to go to keep himself in the picture? The next morning, I made a decision. I called my lawyer and told him to move forward with a restraining order. Eric had crossed the line, and I wasn't going to wait for him to escalate further. I also started looking for a place to stay. As much as I hated the idea of leaving the kids in that house with Laura, I knew the current arrangement wasn't sustainable. The tension was suffocating, and the constant proximity to Laura only deepened my anger and hurt. Later that day, as I scrolled through listings on my laptop, Ethan walked into the room. "Dad, are we moving?" he asked, his voice hesitant. I looked up, startled. "What makes you think that?" He shrugged. "You've been looking at houses. And you and Mom don't talk anymore." I don't want to leave my room." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I closed the laptop and pulled him into a hug. "I don't know what's going to happen yet," I said honestly. "But wherever we are, I promise you'll always have a home with me." He nodded, but his small frame felt heavier in my arms. I realized then that no matter how much I tried to shield the kids, they were already feeling the weight of this situation. I had to act, and soon. For their sake and mine, the day after Ethan's question, I resolved to make some changes. The kids needed stability, and I couldn't keep living in the same house as Laura, pretending everything was fine. I called my lawyer to discuss temporary custody arrangements and began preparing to move out. When Laura saw me packing a bag, her face crumpled. "You're leaving?" she asked, her voice trembling. "For now," I said firmly. "The kids need at least one stable parent, and I can't be that if I'm stuck here with you." Her eyes filled with tears. "Tom, please, we can fix this." "We can't," I replied, my tone icy. "You didn't just betray me, you betrayed our family. And every day you've let Eric linger in our lives, you've made it worse." She didn't try to stop me after that. Instead, she retreated to the bedroom, leaving me to explain the situation to the kids. That evening, I sat Ethan and Sophie down in the living room. "I need to talk to you both about something important," I began, forcing my voice to stay steady. Ethan looked worried, while Sophie just clutched her stuffed animal tighter. "Mom and I are having some problems," I continued. "It doesn't mean we don't love you, but I'm going to be staying somewhere else for a little while." "Are you getting divorced?" Ethan asked bluntly. I hesitated. "We're figuring things out," I said. "But no matter what happens, you'll still see both of us, and we'll always love you." Sophie sniffled. "Is it my fault?" she asked quietly. The question broke my heart. I pulled her into a hug. "No, sweetheart. None of this is your fault. This is between Mom and me." Ethan nodded slowly, but I could see the worry etched on his face. "Will we still see you every day?" he asked. "Of course," I promised. "I'll make sure of it." Later, after the kids were asleep, I finalized my plans. I found a short-term rental nearby and made arrangements to move in the next day. The move itself was quick and quiet. Laura stayed out of the way, barely saying a word as I packed what I needed. When I was done, I turned to her. "I'll be in touch about the kids," I said. She nodded, her face pale and drawn. "Tom, I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know," I replied. "But sorry doesn't fix this." As I drove to the rental, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Leaving the house felt like a small step toward regaining control of my life, but it also drove home the reality that my family would never be the same. That night, as I unpacked in the unfamiliar apartment, I sat on the couch and stared at my phone. A text came in from Ethan. "Ethan, good night, Dad. Love you." I replied immediately, "Good night, buddy. I love you too. Always." It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind me why I was doing this. I had to stay strong, for them. This wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the start of a new life. Moving out was both a relief and a heartbreak. I spent the first few nights adjusting to the quiet of the rental, but it was the kids I missed the most. I made sure to FaceTime them every evening, helping Ethan with homework and listening to Sophie talk about her day. Laura reached out only once. "Can we talk?" she texted. "There's nothing left to say right now," I replied, keeping it short. The lawyer finalized a temporary custody arrangement. I'd have the kids on weekends and a couple of weeknights. The first weekend, I took them to the park, their favorite pizza place, and ended with a movie. "Are you okay, Dad?" Ethan asked as we walked home. I smiled and squeezed his hand. "I'm getting there," I said. The truth was, it still hurt. But seeing the kids smile reminded me that moving forward was the only option. Small steps, but steps nonetheless. A month passed, and the dust slowly began to settle. The kids adjusted better than I expected, though Ethan asked more questions than Sophie. He wanted to know if I was okay, if I still loved Mom, if we'd ever live together again. I answered honestly, telling him that while I'd always love his mom as the mother of my children, some things couldn't be fixed. Sophie, on the other hand, was quieter. She clung to me during our weekends together, her tiny arms wrapping tightly around my neck whenever it was time for me to drop them back off with Laura. "I don't like when you leave," she whispered one evening. "I don't like leaving either, sweetheart," I said, my voice breaking. "But no matter where I am, you're always in my heart." The rental slowly began to feel more like home. I put up some of the kids' drawings, stocked the pantry with their favorite snacks, and even bought a small second-hand bike for Ethan when he said he wanted to practice riding. Every visit became a little brighter, a little easier. Laura remained distant. She sent polite texts about the kids' schedules and updates, but we barely spoke beyond logistics. I didn't know if she was waiting for me to soften or if she was too ashamed to say more, but I didn't push it. One Friday, when I went to pick up Ethan and Sophie, Laura met me at the door. She looked different, smaller somehow, like the weight of everything was crushing her. "Tom," she started hesitantly, "can we talk for a second?" I glanced at the kids, who were putting on their shoes in the hallway. "What is it?" She hesitated, wringing her hands. "I wanted to say I'm sorry again. For everything. I know I've said it before, but I mean it. I see what I've done, and I hate myself for it." Her voice cracked, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "I'm not doing this for me," she continued. "I just want you to know that I'm trying. For the kids, for myself, to be better. I know I can't undo what I've done, but I hope someday you'll see that I'm not the person who hurt you anymore." I stared at her for a moment, unsure of what to say. "Laura," I said finally, my voice calm but firm, "I appreciate you saying that. I do. But forgiveness isn't something I can rush. My focus is on the kids right now. That's all." She nodded, blinking back tears. "I understand." With that, I called for Ethan and Sophie, who came bounding toward me, their laughter a sharp contrast to the tension hanging in the air. As I walked them to the car, I felt a strange sense of peace. Not closure exactly, but a step toward it. The drive back to my rental was filled with their chatter about school and friends. Sophie talked about her favorite art project, while Ethan described a soccer game he was excited to play. I listened, smiling, soaking in their energy. That evening, after dinner, we sat on the couch, watching a movie together. Ethan leaned his head on my shoulder, and Sophie fell asleep curled up against me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt grounded. I didn't know what the future would hold, whether Laura and I would ever find a way to co-parent peacefully, or if Eric would finally disappear from our lives for good. But in that moment, surrounded by my kids, I realized something important. I wasn't broken anymore. The betrayal still stung, and the wounds would take time to heal, but I had my own life now. A life where I could protect my kids, find happiness again, and rebuild on my terms. When I tucked Ethan and Sophie into bed that night, I kissed their foreheads and whispered the same promise I'd made to myself. "No matter what happens, I'll always be here for you." It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was one I could live with, and one I could keep building, one step at a time.